Hi, welcome to Real AI Now, a podcast about real applications of AI in business brought to you by TrueImpulse. So my name is Mark and I'm a product manager at TrueImpulse and I'm your host on this podcast today. This episode is going to be about digital markets and ecosystems and how AI has created some novel aspects to those markets and even created new markets. We dig into AI as an enabling agent and look at the particular focus on insurance and financial services today. So before I introduce our guest, I would like to inform you that it would be great if you could subscribe to this podcast, like the episode if you like it. And this episode and the other episode of this podcast are always available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts as well. So you will find additional information in the description to this video, and please subscribe to the channel. So today we have very special guests. So welcome Marco Peyer. Hi, Marco.
Hi, Mark.
So
thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Yeah. So Marco is a visionary entrepreneur, co-founder, and chief product officer at Risktec. They have the goal to make use of technology to use data in transforming the risk industry to avant-garde. He's an enthusiastic product smith crafting digital products from ideation to monetization. So Marco brings over 20 years of wealth of experience and a track record in building digital products in the tech and reinsurance industry. So prior to Risktec, Marco was leading a global reinsurance solution data team at Swiss Re. This is also where the both of us met in the past, working for Swiss Re. And among many other things, three things are very important or very close to Marco's heart. I think people, purpose, and progress. So Marco, thanks again for joining this podcast.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. So let's get started. So Marco, we worked together in the past, as I mentioned, developed a lot of internal and external solutions for our employer, always in the insurance and reinsurance space. But what is very interesting to me, or curious, you mentioned while we were discussing this podcast, the three important things: people, purpose, and progress. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. No, thanks a lot, Mark, and happy to be here on this podcast today. And it's actually a good question you have, right? How did I come to these three keywords, right? Because with these three keywords, I could actually describe quite a lot of what I've done in the past, what we have done together, Mark, as well in multiple projects, but also where I see where we are heading nowadays, right? So we will talk later about data, we will speak about technology, artificial intelligence, and the sheer amount of things that nowadays we can do. But one of the key conclusions is, and this is one of my learnings as well, in the end, it's always about people, right? It's people who make technology, it's people who benefit from technology. So people first. This is also why, as you nicely said, that's the keyword for me there. And the second thing you mentioned, purpose. We can deal with data, we can deal with technology because it's fancy and because it's interesting to explore new things. Mm-hmm. But if we do things purpose driven, this is where I believe we come to the third word, which is progress. This is where we can truly make progress, right? And not just being about experimenting different technologies and different data sets, but where we can truly start to generate value. And this is, how I would say the three words, how they belong together. People having something in mind in terms of a purpose which they're following, and ultimately making progress in the end, right?
Yeah. And I like that reflection. So that's also a bit independent of time, right? This applies across the years, right? Technology changes, but these things remain stable over the past. Over the past and also in the future. You mentioned something else, and I'm trying to make the link to also artificial intelligence, which is the topic of this podcast. You mentioned data. And data, I think, is very key in building digital products. It's all about, to some extent, processing data. Can you say a couple of words about how do you see the role of data in insurance and in financial services, like historically, and maybe also what has changed in recent years looking at data?
I think it's very simple. If you think about it, then data in, let's take insurance, whether this is primary insurance, large corporate, or even reinsurance, there has always been data in there, and this is pretty straightforward. And now you might say, well, this is this is no surprise because insurance, as you could say, the broader financial services industry, it's not about producing, like tables or chairs or monitors or cars, something which is very tangible, right? It's an intangible thing there. In insurance, you're talking in the end of a contract, of a promise that you're making to take care of a residual risk. And obviously, you need to have data points for this. So I could put it in different words. I think it boils down in the insurance sector to one key thing that you have to master as any insurance company, which is to know and to understand risks. And for that, you ultimately need data. Now, whether this data in the past has been on some paper and you have done some drawings and calculations and actuarial models, whether you have done that in the early stage on some Excel spreadsheets, or if you're doing this nowadays, it's much more modern and much more efficient technologies. I think data has always been at the core of the business, like insurance. So I think that there is no such thing these days in insurance that you could say it works without data. And this is also why, Mark, I believe when people are nowadays talking so heavily about data-driven and data-led organizations, I think that's all good. But we should not forget that all these organizations have been data-driven in the past, exactly. Right? So it's not a surprise, but I think to your second question a bit, also what is different nowadays, right, compared to the historical view here. I think the sheer amount of data has changed significantly. Right. So this is one thing. So there is much more data which is available these days, which posed also some challenges, you could say, over the course of the past maybe 20, 25 years, where working with masses of data with huge volumes was not necessarily efficient because there was a bit of a lack of technology, or technology wasn't necessarily accessible to everybody out there. Take some smaller, more regional insurers, difficult to acquire the big technologies needed to process large amounts of data, which is one thing. And the other thing was just purely the availability of data and being able to imagine what you could do with all these data points, and probably not the classical data points you would have taken from the past, but also alternative data sets, which if you think from a bit, let's say, a broader context of the risk, that there are completely different viewpoints that you can incorporate. So I think this has changed, and this has ultimately also, I think, led to this, call it a hype, call it a trend, call it a focus on data-driven and the strong data focus, which nowadays pretty much exclusively all the insurers and reinsurers of this world are talking about.
Okay, so to summarize your thought, you're saying so data has always been around. The necessity to process data has been around for the last, since the beginning of insurance, so to say. But now we're having much more data. You also mentioned an interesting word, paper. So a lot of business in insurance is still on paper or paper related, right? So there is this, let's say, old paper world. Then on the other side, there are the fully digital, built from scratch digital insurers, which, let's say, like are natively digital. Can you say a couple of words how AI and technology can help insurers also to transition from this kind of paper world, historic paper world, to the fully digital world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a very natural one that everybody could not kind of imagine, right? If you talk about paper, as you said, we could imagine, transitioning into more of a digital world, right? Mm-hmm. So many years back when you were actually scanning all the contracts and your archives and kind of digitizing that, putting it into an electronic format so that you can also share it across different offices. We had the topic of more global organizations being able to leverage workforce. How do you do that if you have a paper-based archive, right? So you need to bring it into an efficient transportable format, which in the end is only digital, right? So I think this is the very classic one. It's a very obvious one, but I think technology and let's say whether this is then rule-based machine learning, and even then in a much more advanced state, artificial intelligence, right? Which I think, as a side note, we are still far away in many of the cases. We are more applying the kind of the base technologies. Technology helps us, I believe, here in this industry to give us two additional advantages, right? So one is this more efficiency play, you could say. So if one axis was performance, in terms of how we do business, then clearly this is one thing, right? And there is still lots that we can do there. One is to digitize, one is also then to automate processes, and one is to then also move away from process-centric to more information-centric type of work, right? So let the machine do the processing parts of the information, bits and pieces and documents that you are doing. But again, I believe that the technology side gives us also some completely new possibilities in two folds that I could see. One,
so
again,
that's maybe where I wanted to also dig a bit deeper. So on one side, to summarize, right, there is the, let's say, more back office related work, right, which is like paper-based.
Yes.
But then, as we're also speaking about digital markets and ecosystems and new products, there is an innovation, let's say, boost given through technology, which opens the world for novel products, right?
That's exactly where I wanted to go, Mark. So absolutely. So one is more kind of the internal processing, the efficiency play, and the other one is the innovation in terms of products as well, right? And if you think about new products, what would be new products, right? You could reshape an existing product into a slightly different fashion. You could change the distribution model, for example, and embed your traditional insurance product into a digital market somewhere, into a digital ecosystem where it's just an embedded service. You buy a car and you get the insurance on top of it, right? You have dynamic pricing and all of these things. That could be one thing, but I could also very well imagine technology, and I've seen that actually to truly work, that technology can even enable and make it happen that we generate completely new products to handle also new and changing risks, right? So talking of climate change and a few things which are posing completely different challenges, which I believe we cannot master with just applying the old models and the old ways and the old covers and the old type of products. So we need to actually have completely new ways of tackling risks. And that needs technology. That needs technology to, again, process data, to interconnect with different parties out there. Does not work without, let's say, technological services. And it needs data, right? Because technology only without data, it's two things that have to go hand in hand.
And then I also see technology as a new risk emerging, right? Thinking about cybersecurity attacks on organizations, etc. Right? So like it's like you need, again, more technology to deal with the technology which is newly introduced and to assess and manage
absolutely
risk. Yeah. Okay. So what would you recommend to somebody who wants to embark on that journey, right? Getting more digital, innovating about new products. Where does the usage of AI, in your eyes, make sense? And what are the basics maybe you need to do first before you can get to a place where you can effectively leverage AI?
Yeah, I think, you know, the biggest probably mistake one could make is to start actually from a, let's say, from a tooling point of view, right? So here's a tool, let me install the tool and then let me see what I can do with it, right? And I put it in different words. There is a great tool out there and there are many out there. Now let's find a use case, what we could actually do out of this. Now, I do have some sympathy for this thinking in terms of, you know, let's explore the possibilities. Let's do some, let's say, ideation. Let's get some inspiration of what would even be possible out there. Completely like that, makes completely sense. But I don't think that this should be the main driver if you really think about, you know, transforming your business into the digital era. So I think this is where you need to have much more of a business strategy, which has as an integral component technology and data, and you don't have a separated IT strategy or a separate data strategy somewhere, which is also drafted by somebody else, right, in the organization. But this really has to come from the core of the business. This has to come from the executive leadership. So this needs to form an integral and strong core part of your business strategy, right? So start from, it's like always, right? Start from what do you ultimately want to achieve as a business? And then we can think about how do we accomplish this. But again, don't lose sight of what the possibilities are out there, because again, you might fall into the trap if you just think from your current standpoint of business that you're just optimizing, right? And here comes one of my favorite
next level of innovation, right?
Yeah. Yes. And you know, Mark, here comes one of my favorite quotes, which is, improving the candles hasn't made a light bulb, right? And now we can even extend this from the light bulb to the LED light. But this way of thinking, I think you need to be mentally agile in the way that you can look at different perspectives, but you genuinely need to want to change and to get betterment and to make progress and to have a strong purpose as well for your technology people, because just hiring, for example, data scientists or technology people will again not solve your digital transformation agenda, right? You need to have a strong purpose there.
Yeah, so one of my favorite quotes, to add one on top of that, is nailing a propeller on your house doesn't make it an airplane, right? So it's again the same thing. So just doing a bit of brushes here and there, you will not generally transform your object, or in this case your business.
Absolutely.
You spoke a bit about the kind of like trap of hiring data scientists, many of them potentially buying a tool, and then you're stuck kind of as an organization with, okay, well, what exactly is the problem we want to tackle? So say reverse the logic, maybe hire very few data scientists which give you insights, hire a couple of business folks, engineers who can kind of like start from a prototype to explore what is the right way to doing business, what is the potential of technology, and then grow the organization from there. Is that the way you see things working?
Yeah, I've seen that work, right? But I've also seen variations of this to work, and I think important is do start, right? And you know, start, get moving. And it's absolutely right what you're saying, Mark. Makes lots of sense to, for example, have a small seed team, like you remember we did as well. We had a few data scientists, right, who were also open enough to experiment and to learn about, you know, what are the true business problems of today, right? And you can't reinvent a whole industry overnight, right? So you also need to be a bit humble there and you know, create a bit an understanding also from these people who master the technologies, who master data science, who understand what artificial intelligence and machine learning and all these things truly mean, right? But they also need to be open to understand where the industry is, right? And I think if there is a mutual understanding from, you could say in quotes, the two, then you can proceed. But you know, one of the learnings I also had is if you're leaning towards one of the extremes, right? One of the extreme being at the end of the spectrum, you need to understand the business, and otherwise you can't do anything, versus business understanding not required. You just need to master the latest and greatest technologies and approaches. That's not going to work. And I can tell you one learning we had, and this goes a few years back now, when I was visiting two colleagues actually here in Switzerland in the artificial intelligence university in Lugano, which is in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. And I met there with Professor Luca Gambardella and with Jürgen Schmidhuber, and the two colleagues were looking at us and like, so why are you here today? You have a problem in mind and you already concluded that you want to solve it with artificial intelligence. But let me challenge you, what is it ultimately that you need to have, right? And this conversation showed us, despite these two gentlemen being the absolute amazing people for doing what we wanted to do with, you know, artificial intelligence, machine learning models, image recognition, etc., but going down to what is the ultimate issue you're trying to solve, and could you look at it from a different perspective? The conclusion might still be the same, but the thinking process to get to that solution is at least as important as your initial thought that this might be the right approach to tackle, right? And this opens a much bigger spectrum, Mark, I think, to solving, because there is not just one way how to address certain challenges, and it's not always just about the latest and fanciest, right? Okay,
so continuing on that thought, what do you consider the most pressing need insurers who want to be relevant in 10 years need to tackle these days?
Yeah, I would say it's two things. So one thing is, if you just very generally think about what is a challenge for insurers today, despite, of course, climate change, right, and new emerging risks which are out there, which creates a complete different set of challenges also in terms of understanding risks, as we initially said. So this is one thing that needs to be mastered. The second thing, I think, goes back to, if you talk to lots of insurers here in Europe, but also globally, is two challenges they also have on the cost side, right? Which is the cost of distribution, the cost of loss adjustment. And these are two big factors. And I believe that with advanced technologies here and having a bit this data-driven approach, that can definitely help. If you do it right, this can definitely help to address these two challenges from an operational perspective. But again, it also opens much more possibilities on how do we tackle all the risks that we are confronted with, right? Extreme weather-related events, which are not so easy to solve with existing or previous models, right? So we have to also be much more adaptive to the climate situation. We have to actually address also secondary perils, which you could say are not so secondary as it literally says, right? So like hail, flood, storm, wildfire. So these are, according to the experts, much more likely to come, much more severe, much more frequent, extreme rainfall, extratropical cyclones. So I think there are lots of challenges that content-wise, from a risk point of view, need to be addressed, as well as the operational ones. And I really hope that in the industry that we really stop to treat IT, technology, data science, investments into artificial intelligence, machine learning, into all of these activities, that we don't treat that as a cost, but that we see that as a driver, really as a potential to grow, as a potential to do a better risk selection, as a potential to, in the end, also optimize profitability. And look, at the very end of the day, it is about increasing resilience, right? Because I think that's the ultimate goal of the insurance industry. And it's not just about giving a financial promise at the end to cover for certain scenarios.
Yeah. So basically what you're buying is your ability to get over whatever happens to you and to restart and either be back in business, get healthy, or help you with the financial burden of whatever that particular risk means. Yeah. You mentioned a couple of different roles in the workforce, right? And I wanted to, of an insurer, and I wanted to speak a bit about actuaries and data scientists, right? Historically, I mean, insurance companies are very much based on the work actuaries do. Now there is this new type of person, data scientist, who kind of does something similar, but not exactly. There's also a lot of certifications and legal requirements in the space about what an actuary should do. Do you see these professions blend? What is your take on the role of the actuary and the data scientist while going forward?
Yeah, I think it's right to say that profiles will change, right? And profiles are always on the basis of something that we have defined in the past, and we try to, let's say, generalize a bit so that the profiles are generally understood what it means. What does an actuary do? What does somebody on the contract side do? What does an underwriter do? What does a data scientist do? Is not clear to many still out there, right? So they believe these are the colleagues who can do magic if you give them access to a database, right? And they can solve all your problems, and the same for the technologists. So I think there is a natural blend from two perspectives. One, if you look at education, thinking about, Mark, now students that we also quite often talk to, right? Rarely you see people coming from different segments who are not mastering to a certain extent technologies and programming languages like Python, working with Databricks and certain products to really be in that space where typically like 5, 10, 15 years ago, you would only have seen data scientists, engineers, and technologists. So I see a shift there on the education side as one.
Okay. So what advice would you give to a youngster, to a student who's now doing his bachelor's or even master's, who wants to get into digital products in the financial services industry? What recommendation do you give, or would you give?
Look, the most fundamental one I would say is be curious and stay curious, and stay curious throughout, you could say, your entire career, right? So always stay curious, always be open to learn new things. But a bit more practical to this, I would clearly say, is don't leave out any aspects when it comes to technology, programming languages, understanding how technologies like cloud works, understanding also certain models and methods in terms of software engineering. How do you craft products as well? Because building a digital product is not just about tech, right? It's also about product architecture. It's about product design. It's about how do you also bring a product to the market? How do you monetize a product? So there are lots of disciplines you need to master. So I would almost say a bit the ideal aspiration should be to not just become a deep expert in one field, but maybe to have a bit of an aspiration towards becoming this, you could say, P or even comb shaped profile, which means that you should be mastering multiple domains, perhaps not all to the same level of detail, but that you can combine them. I think this is a much, much more powerful asset and skill that you would have if you understand cross different domains, a few things that you can combine. And imagine, right, if you come as a young student out of university, you master technology to an extent, you understand how digital products work, you understand a bit the consumer space and how customer experience matters. You understand a little bit about financial services and what insurance is and how an insurance product works. And you can even work with data and you can be hands-on. Imagine what big asset that you already have and that you could bring in and later on add your experience on top of that. I think that would be a fantastic combination where you could do lots of things within that industry or even across.
Yeah, so that's really the unicorn profile everybody is looking for. So this blend technology with business savviness and the courage to try new things and the natural curiosity to just discover new things or bringing also new ideas into insurance.
Agreed.
Speaking about new ideas, so I wanted to pick your brain on a couple of products, right? Which are types of products which are new, which are emerging, which are also driven by technology, I would say exclusively. And the first two which come to my mind are parametric insurance and also embedded insurance. Can you just say to our listeners a couple of words what those types of insurances are and why technology plays such an important role in this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, picking your first one. So parametric insurance, often also called index-based insurance. To give you a very simple example that perhaps everybody has had experience once in lifetime is flight delay compensation. What does that mean? So you basically book a flight ticket. Let's take the example of Zurich to London, and you say, for this particular flight, while you're booking, I also want to get a coverage in case that this particular flight is late. Let's assume 1 hour. I pay a premium of 5 or 7 Swiss francs or British pound. And if that flight is late by X, which is predefined, then I get the payout automatically. All right. So this is I could say the most simple type of a product in parametric you could imagine. Now a bit more in abstract terms, it is a predefined index. So it's not an indemnity based product, which is kind of on the other side of the spectrum, but it's an index based product where the index is transparent, is defined. It has to be based on an independent data source, right? So that already gives you a hint towards why does technology matter in that one. Without data, without independent data from the insurer, such a product would not work. Such a product would not be accepted by regulators, right? So you need to have access to data. Like, for example, in this flight delay, it would be flight stats or any other type of a data provider.
So the advantage being that you mentioned before distribution and settlement. So the settlement in this case is easy.
Yes, absolutely. So what is actually the beauty of parametric insurance and why is that something which, by the way, also personally, I believe there is a huge potential even here in you could say in Europe, in Switzerland, in Central Europe, Western Europe. Why is there a huge potential? I'll get to this in a second. But yes, absolutely. So the mechanic and the beauty of it, Mark, is that a parametric product by design can and should be fully automated. That means from a consumer perspective, super simple. And to your second point, which we will get to, I guess, in a few minutes, embedded insurance. Imagine this is fully embedded wherever you are as a consumer. And you don't go and think about, well, today I need to buy insurance. Nobody does that. Nobody gets up in the morning to buy insurance, right? But parametric insurance, you could see pretty much as an add-on, as an extension, and something which is, very specific to a certain situation, very transparent to you as well. Ticket, you pay the premium, you get the automatic payout. And the beauty of this also for an insurer, for a carrier, is that this can be fully automated. If you do it as well, in the back office, in the middle office, there should be absolutely nobody who has to process anything other than the machine doing the whole process of automatically determining is the index, the trigger reached, and is that claim actually fulfilled, and do the corresponding automated payout, right? Of course, you need the engineers and the people to review the models, right? Make sure, etc. But in general, it should be a very simplistic product. Now, why is this interesting? Look into first, before we are in Europe, look into Southeast Asia. Gig economy, right? So big thing there, people are dependent on different type of digital services. Otherwise, they are simply out of work, right? If certain payment platforms or certain delivery platforms aren't working for some time, people are basically out of job, right? So very important. If you can embed such small products for example, outage of cloud, outage of certain software as a service products. But also we have more extreme and more frequent extreme weather related events, right? Floodings, we have extra tropical cyclones, as I mentioned before. If you can offer a parametric insurance product for a very little premium to get the payout very quickly, you can truly do something in terms of increasing resilience. Yes, which, you know, and to Europe, and why is it still a bit in you could say, in early days here? I believe that prosperity reduces the need or the demand, actually, more the demand for these type of products. But imagine if you define products which are increasing the value of an underlying product that you have. Take your solar panel as an example, and you know, lack of or a shortfall of solar radiation, the value of your product and your investment still matters to you, even though it's probably not so much a topic of prosperity.
Yeah. So the example which also comes to my mind is that when you buy seeds, you know, to grow plants, etc., right? There could be already, with you buying the seeds, right? You're buying the insurance that in case the crop doesn't grow because of extreme weather, because of drought, flooding, etc.
Absolutely.
You have the ability to plant something next year. And for us in Europe, where prosperity is higher, I mean, this sounds like, okay, well, you would just buy something new. But there are areas in this world where people could afford to buy this new batch of seeds. So it's really bringing resilience to more people.
That's a perfect example, Mark. And I think generally in agriculture, there is tremendous opportunities for parametric. And we see that in other countries and regions of the world, like in China, where agriculture is, I believe, still the third biggest line of business from an insurance point of view. There is a tremendous potential there. And you know, one thing I want to mention to this is it's also people's understanding and view and impression of insurance, right? And the very traditional one, probably all around the globe, is, you know, insurance is typically difficult to understand what is included, what is excluded, what is really covered. And then the typical opinion of some people, well, if there is actually a case, if I do have a claim, then I'm always in the position as a policyholder, as an insured, who have to provide evidence what happens down to the last detail. These type of products are different, right? And they are also different and therefore attractive to very price sensitive consumers, you know, who have also certain entry barriers into the insurance market. So I think the protection gap around the globe is huge, is still huge. And with such type of innovative products, which we can again also place in a digital fashion, very close to where, or actually in front of where the consumer is. Speaking of micro insurance type of products, right away on your smartphone, accessible even on simple let's say mobile phones, which do not even have apps and stuff like that, but you just work with text messages, like, you know, Central African markets, we see that as well. These things could really work, right? And this is how you can slowly but surely start to increase the resilience and provide something back to the bigger community.
Okay, so you mentioned distribution before, so really it's not just the ability to distribute your existing product cheaper and better, but also to reach out to, let's say, an audience which would not have been covered before, and which you open up this world of insurance through technology.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's exciting, and I think it's a very powerful statement, right? That technology really still has the purpose of making life of people better. In this case, through the means of insurance. And I think it's great to see that technological evolution can help do that. Yeah. Speaking of technology evolution, and maybe a bit also wrapping up our discussion, what is the technological innovation which is the most fascinating to you, what you have seen in recent days or years?
Yeah, there is many of them, Mark, a bit across the board, right? But what actually I find very fascinating is if you actually think of products which are bringing something which before did not really exist, right? In kind of, you could say, in the non-digital world, because of lack of a foundation, lack of a platform, lack of a place where, you know, people could perform certain activities. And if that's where technology helps to create something entirely new, this is what I find most fascinating. Of course, I find fascinating if we see how quickly we can establish, you know, a payment integration and how seamless that works. Fascinating, right? Of course, I find fascinating if I see that I can have somewhere an embedded insurance product, and you know, I don't have to go to an insurer and go through a lengthy process, and it's just a matter of a checkbox, and I get a small but very relevant and very tailored product for what I need. But what I find fascinating, and you know, I'm a bit selfish here on this one, but it's something we are currently implementing as well, is to move a process which before did not even exist. We had a lack of a process to coordinate experts in the case of a big natural catastrophe like an earthquake, and to bring all these experts onto one platform across different organizations, bring them onto one digital platform to coordinate those scarce resources of experts to be able to do, you know, in the end, assessments of buildings, assessments in terms of loss, and to run that, right? So if I imagined this before, this was simply not possible. So what would have happened? It would have been a lengthy process with a completely unknown outcome. And I find it fascinating when, through technology, you can bring people finally together onto one platform, and you can have people to work on something common, which before they would never have been able to do. And not just because it wasn't efficient, but it also did not give them that perspective of, hey, there is a bigger purpose behind, right? Yeah. And in this purpose, we are reducing the time to figure out where do we have to invest as a society, as a country, as a government, as insurers as well, to restore infrastructure and to rebuild properties, to rebuild buildings for people to get back to normal life, right? So this I find from also the impact extremely fascinating. And I find it also fascinating with how little fancy technology you can already achieve quite a lot if you do this very purpose-driven. And yes, there is also the need to do something much more advanced when it comes to the data, etc., which opens completely new doors that beforehand on a whiteboard or so you could not even have ever imagined.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a strong statement, and it really links back to the start where I spoke about people, purpose, and progress, right? So that's the common denominator out of the discussion. So Marco, thank you for your time. Thank you for the very interesting discussion. Thanks for joining on this podcast. So it was a pleasure having you.
Likewise, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And then to our listeners and viewers, so again, please hit the subscribe button and like this video. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. And thanks again, Marco. Wish all of you a great day.